When I hear people say you don't need God to be moral, I always pause and think, where exactly does your morality come from? Is it something you just feel inside? Is it society telling you what's right and wrong? Because if we're being honest, societies have justified slavery, genocide, and oppression at different times in history. So if morality is just a human construct built on cultural consensus, then it's fragile. Change the consensus, and you can justify anything. That's why I challenged the atheist on that exact point. I didn't ask it to win an argument. I asked it because it matters. If you take away God or any divine authority, what are you left with? A moral system based on opinion, not objective truth. And if that's all we have, opinion, then who's to say Hitler was wrong, or Stalin, or any dictator who believed they were morally justified? Without an external higher standard, morality becomes a coin toss. Whatever the majority agrees on becomes right, even if it's dead wrong. The atheist in front of me argued quite confidently that we evolved to be moral, that kindness and cooperation are naturally selected traits. I don't entirely disagree with the fact that empathy can have evolutionary advantages, but evolution doesn't care about what's right. It cares about what works. Survival isn't the same as virtue. You can lie, cheat, and manipulate your way to the top and still be fit. That's not morality. That's strategy. So I asked, why is it wrong to kill someone? Not just illegal, wrong, errantly, absolutely wrong. And he stumbled. He gave a utilitarian answer, because it harms society. But harming society isn't the same as evil. What if killing someone improves society? That's a dangerous path to walk down. Without a fixed point, a divine command, or a sacred principle, anything becomes justifiable with the right spin. See, when you believe in God, or at least in some higher moral order, you're anchored. Right and wrong don't shift with trends. They're not up for debate every generation. Murder is wrong, not because it's unpopular, but because it violates a fundamental truth about human life, that it's sacred. And that word, sacred, doesn't exist in an atheist framework. Without the sacred, all you're left with is preference. He tried to say morality evolves with us like technology, but you don't judge ethics the same way you judge smartphones. An old phone isn't evil. It's outdated. But slavery wasn't just an old idea. It was you wrong then and now. That's the difference. Real morality isn't based on what's new, but on what's true. If morality is just evolving, then we're always in motion, never standing on solid ground. That's a terrifying place to build a civilization. And here's the moment it hit hardest. I said, you say you don't believe in God, but you believe in justice, fairness, love, human rights. Where do those come from? He didn't have an answer. Because those ideas, just rights, equality, they don't grow on trees. They aren't atoms or molecules. They're ideals. They're rooted in a view of humanity that says we are more than biology, that we have dignity. And dignity doesn't from DNA, it comes from something greater. Without that, the greater source, morality, is a house without a foundation. It may look impressive, but shake it hard enough, and it collapses. That's what I was trying to expose. Not to humiliate him, but to wake people up. This idea that you can just be a good person without God sounds nice, but it's built on borrowed values. You're standing on ground laid by faith traditions, especially Christianity, whether you admit it or not. And I get it. Religion's not perfect. It's been abused. It's been used to justify horrors. But the solution to bad religion isn't no religion. It's better religion. Because without any higher moral compass, you're lost in a sea of opinions. Today's right could be tomorrow's wrong. That's not progress. That's chaos. So when people ask, why bring God into it? I say, because if you want real justice, real equality, real meaning, you need something deeper than evolution or consensus. You need something eternal. That's not weakness. It's wisdom. And if admitting that makes me unpopular, so be it. I'd rather stand on truth than float on feelings. There's something I've noticed time and time again in debates with self-proclaimed atheists or militant secularists. They'll reject religion, scoff at faith, and mock belief in God as nothing more than fairy tales for the weak-minded. And yet, here's where the hypocrisy creeps in. They'll passionately defend things like human rights, equality, purpose, and moral justice as if those values just appeared out of thin air. The truth is they're standing on ground they claim doesn't exist. That's what I called out, plain and simple. I wasn't trying to be clever or insulting. I just pointed out the contradiction. You say there is no God, no divine order, no higher truth. Everything is material, just atoms bouncing around in a random universe. Fine, but then why do you care about justice? Why do you talk about human dignity or moral truth as if those things matter absolutely? If we're just highly evolved animals, as many atheists claim, then morality becomes nothing more than personal preference or social conditioning. Yet these same people will turn around and make sweeping moral claims of unprovable. This is wrong. That's unjust. Everyone deserves freedom. And I'm thinking, based on evolution, science, biology, none of those disciplines offer moral absolutes. They describe what is, not what we ought to be. And the moment you say something ought to be a certain way, you're borrowing from a system of belief rooted in something higher, something eternal. I pressed this point in debate. I said, you're relying on concepts that don't naturally exist in your worldview. They'll say religion is illogical, but then believe in intangible values that can't be proven or measured. You can't run a test to prove justice. You can't find equality under a microscope. You can't weigh love on a scale. But they believe in these things deeply. That's faith. Whether they like it or not, they have faith. The only difference is they pretend it's reason. And here's the kicker: they love to call religious people hypocrites. And sometimes they're right. Religion has had its share of scandals and contradictions, but at least religious people admit they believe in something unseen. Atheists do the same, but claim it's all reason and evidence. That's what I call hypocrisy and denial. They deny faith while practicing it. They reject God, but live like God exists. They condemn belief systems, yet build their ethics on borrowed divine principles. I brought this up in conversation, and the response was predictable. He tried to argue that morality can emerge from reason alone, that we don't need religion to know what's right or wrong, but reason can justify anything. The Nazis used reason. Stalin used logic. When there's no transcendent standard, right becomes whatever suits your argument. I pushed back and said, if reason is your only compass, then someone smarter than you can always redefine morality. That landed hard. He paused. He knew I had him. Because deep down, most people don't live as though there's no meaning. They fall in love. They fight for justice. They grieve with depth. They hope. All those things point to something beyond the material. And if you truly believed in a godless, random universe, none of those things would ultimately matter. But they do matter. To him, to me, to everyone watching. That's the tension. That's the hypocrisy. You can't scream equality on one hand and then say life has no intrinsic value on the other. You can't talk about love being sacred and then say humans are just chemical accidents. Either there's a deeper meaning or everything is just noise. But atheists don't want to live in that kind of bleak world, so they borrow from the moral vocabulary of religion while denying its foundation. It's like tearing down a building while still trying to sit comfortably on the rooftop. I wasn't trying to insult his intelligence. I was just holding up a mirror, because if you're going to mock believers, at least be consistent with your own worldview. Either embrace the cold, indifferent universe you claim to believe in, or admit that there's something more. But don't pretend you can have both. That's intellectual dishonesty. And look, I get it. People have walked away from religion for all sorts of reasons. Pain, disappointment, hypocrisy, abuse. I'm not dismissing any of that. But walking away from religion doesn't give you a free pass to act as if your values are magically immune from critique. If you want to throw out God, then you need to be honest about what that means. It means no higher justice, no ultimate accountability, no unshakable truth. And if that's the world you want to live in, fine. But don't smuggle in divine values through the back door. That's the point I made. Not to destroy him, but to challenge him. To wake people up, because the loudest critics of faith often carry around the very beliefs they claim to reject. And the real question isn't whether they believe in something. It's whether they're honest enough to admit it. Whenever I hear someone say faith is outdated or irrelevant in today's world, I can't help but ask, have you really looked around? Because if you strip away the surface noise, the headlines, the social media outrage, and just dig a little deeper, you'll see something unshakable. Faith is still at the very core of who we are, how we live, and what we believe, even if we don't always recognize it. And that's the conversation that gets ignored in debates about God. It's not just about belief or disbelief. It's about understanding where we came from and what still holds us together. That's why I pressed this issue when speaking to the atheist. He spoke as if faith was just a reality, something weak people cling to because they can't handle reality. But here's the thing, you don't get modern civilization without faith. You don't get justice, human rights, the value of the individual, Or even the basic idea that life is sacred without religious roots. These ideas didn't just evolve from thin air or rise from random moral instincts. They were born out of belief systems, especially the Judeo-Christian tradition that said every person is created in the image of God and therefore carries infinite worth. Now you might say, well, I believe in human rights and dignity, but I don't believe in God. Sure. But you're benefiting from the cultural momentum of faith. You're living on ground built by generations who did believe in something higher. And even though you might reject the source, the structure still holds. For now. That's what I call borrowed belief. The idea that society can stay moral and meaningful without God is only working because it's running on spiritual fuel poured into the tank long ago. And look at our institutions. Law, education, healthcare, they weren't built in a moral vacuum. They were shaped by religious values. The idea of caring for the sick, the poor, the vulnerable, where do you think that came from? Ancient pagan cultures didn't care for the weak. They glorified power. It was faith, radical, countercultural faith, that said, the last should be first, that children matter, that women deserve dignity, that slaves should be free. These weren't secular discoveries. These were spiritual revolutions. When I brought this up in debate, I wasn't trying to guilt trip anyone. I was trying to show a truth we've forgotten. Faith isn't just personal. It's cultural. It's the invisible framework that holds so much of our shared reality in place. And when you rip it out without understanding what it supports, you don't get progress. You get collapse. You get confusion. You get people searching for meaning in a world they've made meaningless. The atheist tried to argue that we've outgrown religion, that reason and science are enough. But science tells us how. Faith tells us why. Reason can build a machine, but faith tells us how to use it. You can invent technology, but only belief gives you a moral compass for how to wield power. That's not weakness, it's wisdom. And here's what people are forgetting: even secularism borrows from religious roots. The modern idea of the secular state. Freedom of conscience, freedom of speech, the right to worship or not worship. All of that comes from a long struggle led by religious reformers who believed in the sanctity of the soul and the freedom of the will. So when people say religion and politics shouldn't mix, they miss the irony. Our politics wouldn't exist in their current form without religious influence. I pointed that out too. Not to say we should all go back to theocracy. No one's asking for that. But let's be honest about history. Let's be clear where our deepest values come from. Because if you erase the memory of faith from a culture, you don't just lose religion, you lose the very language we use to talk about justice, mercy, forgiveness, and hope. And even on a personal level, look at how people still turn to faith when the world falls apart. In war zones, in hospitals, at funerals, in moments of crisis. We pray. We hope. We believe. Not because we're weak, because we're wired for more than just logic. Faith speaks to the part of us that reason can't reach. It touches our soul, our longing, our questions about purpose and eternity. And that's not irrelevant. That's human. So no, I don't believe faith is dying. I believe it's being rediscovered, even if people don't call it that. The rise in mindfulness, spiritual practices, the hunger for meaning. It's all faith in disguise. The only question is whether we'll recognize the roots or pretend we invented it ourselves. That's why I brought faith into the debate. Not to convert anyone, but to challenge this modern amnesia. You can deny God all you want, but you can't escape the imprint he's left on culture, on conscience, and on history. Faith isn't disappearing. It's the reason we've come this far. And without it, we risk forgetting who we are. There's a moment in every intense debate where everything shifts. A question gets asked, and suddenly the person on the other side has nothing. Not because they're unintelligent, but because the foundation they're standing on isn't as solid as they thought. That's what happened in the instant reversal moment I had with the atheist. One question, 5 seconds, and everything flipped. We were going back and forth about God, morality, purpose, the usual suspects in a faith vs atheism debate. He was confident, calm, almost smug, to be honest. He spoke as if he had it all figured out, like belief in God was just a leftover superstition that smart people had grown out of. He leaned heavily on science and reason, arguing that the universe came into being naturally, that human beings are just complex accidents, and that all our values can be explained through evolution and social progress. I let him talk. I let him build his narrative brick by brick. And then I asked the question that stopped him coldly: where did the universe come from? At first, he tried to deflect. Well, we don't know yet, But science is working on it. That's when I leaned in. Exactly, I said. You don't know? And yet you speak as if you do. You're criticizing people of faith for believing in something beyond understanding, but you're doing the exact same thing. The only difference is you're calling your belief science, when in fact it's speculation. That's the moment, the pause, the look in his eyes. The shift from certainty to hesitation. That's when everything flipped. Because here's the truth, none of us really knows what came before time, before matter, before the laws of physics. And yet the atheist wants to claim certainty, wants to say God is impossible, while simultaneously admitting the origin of the universe is unknown. That's the hypocrisy I exposed, not to embarrass him, but to level the playing field. To show that faith isn't just for the religious. Everyone has faith in something. He believes the universe came from nothing through some unknown process. I believe it was created by intelligence, by design. Neither of us can prove it conclusively, but only one of us is honest about calling it belief. I didn't need to win the debate with big words or emotional appeals. I just needed that one honest moment, that one crack in the armor, and that's what this was, a reversal, not of opinion but of power. Suddenly, he wasn't the one on the offensive, he was on defense, and viewers could feel it. The energy shifted. That's the thing about debates like this. People don't always remember every argument or quote, but they, remember how it felt. And when someone goes from unshakable to uncertain, from confident to cornered, that sticks. That's what makes a clip go viral. That's what makes people stop scrolling and watch again. Because they just witnessed a truth break through the performance. And it wasn't just about exposing a gap in his knowledge. It was about exposing the illusion of superiority. Too often, atheists carry themselves like they've risen above ancient myths and entered the light of logic. But when you press them, when you peel back the layers, you find just as much mystery, just as much belief in the unseen as any religious worldview. They just refuse to name it. He said belief in God was lazy thinking. I asked, as believing the universe created itself out of nothing, not lazy? He had no answer, because deep down he knew this wasn't science anymore. This was faith in disguise. And the moment he admitted he didn't know, even slightly, everything he'd built up until then came crashing down. I wasn't trying to be cruel. I just believe in holding people to the same standard they demand from others. If you criticize faith, then admit where your own worldview relies on assumption. If you challenge belief in God, be prepared to defend belief in nothing. Because a nothing is not an answer. It's an evasion. And that's why that moment mattered. Not just for the sake of winning a debate, but for what it revealed. We all wrestle with the big questions. Where did we come from? Why are we here? What happens after this? And pretending you've figured it all out just because you reject religion is intellectual arrogance. Admitting you don't know is the beginning of honesty, and maybe, just maybe, the beginning of belief. So that 5-second pause wasn't just a victory in argument. It was a crack in the illusion of certainty, a glimpse of humility. And for everyone watching, it was the moment they saw that faith isn't foolish. It's courageous. Because while some hide behind complexity to avoid the unknown, others step into the unknown and call it what it is: faith, wonder, mystery, and maybe even God.